This is a short walkthrough of Wet and Sticky to show you some of the primary elements of the UI in the app. There's the palettes, menus, and the gallery, and a few brush strokes. So this is the canvas. The palette at the top, the color palette, has swatches which have a spectrum in them. So when you actually click on a swatch, if it's a pure color, it gives you a spectrum of colors. If you pick on a swatch which is a preloaded one you've made yourself, it just loads the brush with that imprint. The small rainbow at the bottom allows you to change or select colors from a full spectrum. You just click anywhere, click on the green, come back to the palette. It's now loaded, and I can now mix colors in the palette. Here we are. Here's another version of the swatch, and that showed you how you put color into the swatch. Now I'm doing some strokes here. This slider changes the amount of paint on the brush, and therefore if it's towards the left you get short strokes, which you can still move around with the brush, but if you put it to the end you get a stroke which never runs out. You can change the size of the brush, you get a preview, and you get a preview of the area that the brush head is actually working with. So here's some strokes. Now this palette is movable and it's probably on screen all the time. The cog will show you the menus. Now the first menu is mediums. They're all the standard mediums. There's a thing called hairy, which is actually a procedural brush which gives a very lifelike stroke, and we just call it hairy at the moment, but we can save it to be a particular medium that we think it's closest to. The mediums are all made up by adjusting the parameters of the paint and the way the brushes behave. Under tools you have smudging and erasing, and how you erase, whether it's the gallery or the wet paint or the dry paint. Options about the eyedropper, does it pick up dry paint, wet paint, etc., and whether gravity is on. Then we have commands. Now commands, some of these are the sort of file saving commands which will be different on an iPad, but they'll be changed for the iPad, and the UI will be changed. But the most important thing here is the advanced palette. The advanced palette has a series of sliders and a series of information about the brushes. There's different types of brushes which behave differently. They can pick up the paint from different areas. They can behave normally, which means they don't have any procedural elements in them. They can be anti-aliased. In terms of how the paint behaves, you can change the alpha, the roughness, how it's impacted by the roughness of the canvas. You can change the amount it mixes. You can change the impasto, which changes the thickness by using putting highlights in to try and give the impression it's thicker paint. And the descent rate, the rate at which it comes off the brush, and the amount it mixes. So this brush stroke has no mixing, and it just goes straight through. Now with the mixing turned on, you can see the stroke, which started orange, has turned blue. The actual medium, as I say, are created by saving these presets and forming different mediums. So this is one that's sort of I've just made on the fly. It's a bit like chalk, but if I actually try the real chalk one, look at the way the sliders will change. Now again, the user could fiddle with these and make their own ones. It's not the real chalk, it's a version called chalk. If you put on the hairy, it gets better, and if you use a different brush, it gets better still. So we use the ink brush, and now we have something which is much more like real chalk. So using the edit button, users can save these. Anti-aliasing is used on smaller brushes, it's used on pencil. It's processor intensive, so we have to test that on the iPad. If you wet the paint, it starts to behave like watercolor, and the paints bleed. We've seen that in the previous video. So if you use the edit dialog, you would get a dialog which would be we haven't done it yet, but it would allow you to create new brushes which you can preset, so you can save. So the other thing is the gallery. Again, the UI is not complete, but in here you can select different paintings, and you can at the bottom of the screen, which is cut off at the moment, there's options such as save, send, duplicate, delete, and one which is called photo. And if you use the photo one, you can load images from your photo library as wet paint or dry paint. Now first of all, I'll show you what it's like if you load a dry paint image. This is an image of Obama. We all recognize him, and if we open that and dry paint, we get a new image. And if I use my brush If it's got paint on it, it just paints over it. Okay, so you can use it as a tracing medium, you can paint over it. But what I wanted to show you is that if I use a, say, oil brush with no paint on it, I get no paint by selecting the palette where there's nothing there. And now when I paint over it, the brush has no impact on that painting because it's all dry. I can't do anything to it, okay, which is what you'd expect. If I go back to the gallery, this time I load the same image, but I load it as wet paint. You'll see a different effect. Now remember, I have a brush which has no paint on it, and when I move my brush over the surface, I start moving the paint, picking up the color from the picture underneath, and I can start to paint a picture on a photograph.